Okay, you ready to talk to Purple in Nebraska?
Let's do it.
All right, I believe Purple had a question for you. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, I actually just had just seen the show was on and had just seen that Sydney was on. And I had actually been wanting to ask her this for a little while now. I think Sydney, I think you were on a show of either Talk Heathen or AXP or whatever it was. And one of the callers had called in and basically said, hey, how do you guys cope with, I'm going to paraphrase because it was a while ago, but all of the stupidity from theist callers, I guess, is maybe not exactly a fair paraphrase, but it's as close as I've got off the top of my head. And your response was something akin to, kind of, it doesn't bother me as much because I know that what they say doesn't affect me. And had even kind of gone so far as to say that it doesn't matter because it isn't going to change my mind. And I guess to me that smacked of intellectual dishonesty, but I didn't want to put that onto you without kind of being able to understand it a little bit more. Because to me, it doesn't sound much different than the Christians that are, or not just Christians, but, people of all stripes who are just like, this is my thought and it can't be convinced otherwise. So I guess it strikes me as odd.
So what I think you might be referring to is, so outside of here, I'm also a debate coach. So I spend a lot of time coaching people on how to debate effectively, how to debate realistically, not including like tournaments and things like that. There's types of debate and styles, just general real world debate. And if that's the conversation I'm recalling, which I'm pretty sure that I remember this, it would have been back in January or February. What I was talking about was people who technically call in to these types of shows are not usually in the market of having their mind changed. A lot of times they have a question that they want to get answered, or they have a topic that they want to get addressed. But the likelihood that you will change somebody's mind, if they're a theist and I'm not a theist, there's a lot of other more minute, smaller topics that people change their minds on all the time. But the likelihood that somebody is going to call this number today and no longer be a Christian by the time they hang up is very slim, whether it's because of what we're talking about, whether it's because somebody's attitude, mine or theirs, whether it's because whatever reason, maybe time constraints. And I'm very comfortable in my beliefs. And I say this all the time. I say it on my podcast. I say it on this channel. I say it on podcasts that I'm on that belong to other people. True belief is when in my opinion, is when you've done all the research that you have ever considered doing. You've done all the research, you've read, you've listened, you've subscribed, you've asked questions, you've asked Jeeves. And at the end of the day, despite whatever you found, you're like, you know what? At the end of the day, I still believe this, whether you're a theist, whether you're an atheist. And I've done enough research, be it through debate, be it through my own questions, be it through interviewing guests on my own podcast. I've never seen the evidence that I need to see in order to change my mind and become a theist. Now, that doesn't mean, and I'm on the record saying this, you can check multiple interviews that I've done. I'm never saying never in terms of the evidence will never present itself. I've never said that. In fact, I've said multiple times, if tomorrow we wake up and science is like, oh shit, everybody, turns out God's been real the whole time. Well, then I'll believe in God. I'll have a lot of questions. I'll have a whole lot of questions to ask him. But it's not, I think what's being misconstrued as the inability to ever change my mind is it might have been a conversation about what people say to me on the internet, what people say to me in these phone calls, what people call me, what people insinuate about me will not affect me when I hang up because I'm resolute in my beliefs and I have the evidence that I need to feel comfortable in my beliefs. And I feel like I've read enough and researched enough and dug enough and dug deep enough into my belief system to have what I consider complete faith in my beliefs. Does not mean I will never be swayed. Does not mean that I am incapable of changing my mind. It does not mean that I refuse to change my mind. And I've never been on record saying that I will never change my mind. But in the conversations that we have in a lot of these live streaming shows, what ends up happening is the conversation is not held by two people who are in the mood or in the market to change their beliefs. It is usually somebody who is resolute in their beliefs calling me, who is resolute in the opposite beliefs as theirs, to have a conversation and hopefully answer some questions. But empirically, I have never been in a situation where I've interviewed somebody or talked to somebody or had a call from somebody where either one of us changed our beliefs by the end of that call. I have changed my opinion on topics. I've changed my opinion on certain political things that I used to think that I believed, on certain social ideas. And again, this is all across the internet. You can find the videos all over the place. I talk about ad nauseum about the number of times I've changed my thoughts and opinions and answers to things based on something somebody said during an episode of a show that I was a part of or on. But I've never let it bother me what people say about me during calls, because again, people call in and insult all the time, because I am resolute in my beliefs, and they've never said anything that has changed my mind, and I've never said anything that has changed their mind. And if that's the conversation I'm recalling, that's what that was about. That's what that comment was about. What are your thoughts?
No, yeah, and you're right about the time frame. So I think you are remembering the conversation correctly, and that's kind of the clarification that I was interested in and kind of expecting to get, because that's kind of what I figured. I wasn't trying to kind of assume ill intent.
Yeah.
It struck me weird.
Well, do you mind if I compliment you really quick? But before we move on, I would like to compliment you really quick. I appreciate you asking that question, because I also think, whether it's because of debate, whether it's because of being on podcast, I also think that anything I say, I should be required to defend should somebody ask. So I just wanted to say, I'm really glad that you called in with that question and you held me accountable to the words that I said in the past, because I think that's important. And I think you presented it in a great way.
No, I appreciate that. Absolutely. And I think like the biggest probably reason that it kind of struck me the way that it did was just because I think it was, in my case at least, I tend to kind of hedge almost everything that I say. I have, my natural tendency has always been to be very confident, possibly bordering on arrogant. And so my kind of own personal journey has been to rein that in. And so for me, whenever I hear someone speaking confidently, because it's something I specifically deal with, I do also try to make sure that I'm not, causing, that I'm not falling back into that, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So,
well, yeah.
I always tend to hedge. And for me, it's always a matter of saying, no, I'm not convinced. And frankly, not only do I not know what would convince me, I can't even think of anything that would, but right. I don't know what I don't know. So it's always a possibility, but it's kind of a hypothetical. It's like not a hypothetical, theoretical possibility.
Could
maybe a functional one.
Totally.
Yeah, I think this again comes back to sort of a right use of power conversation. I mean, the truth is, like, am I open to having my mind changed? Yes, I am. But also, I've been doing this for like more than 5 years now, and it just keeps not happening week by week. And I know I can be kind of incredulous and like ask God to go ahead and interrupt this broadcast right now. Nope, still not doing it. And I know that kind of statement can make it seem like, we're just completely set in our ways and completely unwilling to change. Myself, I think half the people on this network have had meaningful transformations in their faith journey and have come to radically different ideas. Right. Simply in the 5 years that I've been doing this kind of work, I know I've changed my opinions on a number of different topics, but it would also seem really insincere to show up every week and be like, any minute now I could change every belief that I had. Like it wouldn't be honest. Right. And I think that there's something irresponsible about acting as if these conversations in a sort of singular light bulb moment are going to change lives. But what I do believe sincerely, and the reason I keep showing up and spending my time here, is that week after week after week, people will present ideas, perhaps in ways that are laughable and easily able to be completely deconstructed, or perhaps in ways that are a little bit more sophisticated and that are worthy of some time and attention. And by taking the time to methodically parse all of that out, everybody involved, everybody on either end of the conversation, and frankly, most importantly, the thousands of people watching these conversations are going to have a more sophisticated, more nuanced understanding of one another and of these ideas. And ultimately, that's the goal.
Yes.
You know, the existence of the ACA is not so that we can incrementally, 5 calls at a time, try and transform the worldview. It's so that we can expose these ideas and try to understand them and try to understand where they do and likely don't make any good goddamn sense.
Yeah. And something else, Purple, that might be helpful as somebody who's been working really hard on not sounding too confident when I speak, because on a regular basis, I have to say, by the way, that sounded like I knew what I was talking about, but I don't know shit about what I'm talking about. I'm just guessing. It helps if you're also just as confident admitting when you're wrong. So like I might say something with the confidence of somebody who thinks I know everything, but when somebody calls me out and they prove me wrong, I go, my bad. I'm sorry. Thanks for teaching me that. I would have been walking around spewing some dumb bullshit, this whole time. So it might help you by balancing out. It's like, I can't help how confident I sound. And I think it's great, Purple, that you sound confident, but maybe you can balance that out with also confidently announcing when you're wrong, being proud of moments that you learn things, and being open about it as opposed to secretive about the times you're wrong, but boastful about the times you're right.
Yeah, no, and at the risk of possibly sounding a little bit on the arrogant side, I do try to do that for sure. And I would like to think it's something I've also improved, but there's always room for improvement in it. And something that I thought was really interesting in what you said as well, Christy, that I have never thought about before, at least not in that context, is that basically, it's almost better to make it more clear that, this is kind of how I interpreted what you said. So if I got it wrong, let me know. But basically, it's maybe even better to make it more clear when you are only kind of theoretically swayable, rather than making it seem like a genuine option every day, when it's not, can actually come across as more maybe almost more dishonest. And I thought, that's just because to me, I try to put both of those. I try to say, well, it's probably not likely. It's very much in the same realm of likelihood that anyone's ever going to be able to convince me, that, I don't know, that pixies live in space, but that there's always the kind of, lack of 100% certainty.
Yeah,
so I need to leave that option on the table. I tend to focus on the second part and not as much the first part.
But, one thing I can, if I'm being sincere, realistically rule out is that I'm not going to have some gigantic on-camera transformation. I did go from somebody who passionately, fervently dedicated my life to Christ and believed in him, and then I stopped being that. But it wasn't something that happened in a single night. It wasn't something that happened because of a singular comment. It was something that I wrestled with and, quite frankly, told no one about for an entire year. Even then, it was years and years after that before I started to admit it to the people around me and then to come out as an atheist. And I'm not suggesting that that's the model, and I'm not suggesting that a single call with proof of God could not change my mind in meaningful ways, but it would just feel absolutely insincere to try and dangle this bait in front of theist callers that if they have just the right argument that I'm going to transform my life and give up my career, because that's just not the way people think. It's not the way we understand psychology and the trans-theoretical model of change. If you're not familiar with TTM, I think that can really expand this debate. It's just not realistic to think that people are going to have those sort of on-camera transformations. And it would be insincere of me to try and dangle that carrot in front of somebody.
But man, would we get enough calls? Man, get so many.
What was you had mentioned trans-theoretical, was it trans-theoretical model of what?
The trans-theoretical model of change, it's just one theory that helps to explain and understand the process by which humans change their mind or change their behaviors. It's a fairly common, like, Psych 101 type theory. It's one that I don't want to really get into trying to explain here, but it just acknowledges that there are multiple stages that people tend to go through in a very nonlinear fashion when they're trying to, change any sort of meaningful habit, whether that's breaking free of addiction or transforming their cosmology of the world. It does tend to happen in these sort of predictable stages and processes. And it's worthwhile to try and understand those processes rather than just demanding that people be presented with a fact and then allow it to transform their lives. That's just not how human psychology tends to work out.
Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I wasn't expecting you to maybe, to go into all of that. I just wanted to make sure I could write it down so I could look it up later. So no, I definitely appreciate that. I hadn't considered that perspective, that kind of overemphasizing the theoretical possibility could almost be that kind of dangling carrot, as you had, I think, so eloquently put it. And also, I appreciate you as well, Sydney, in kind of not only clarifying, the statement that you had made, and taking that, I think, hopefully well-placed or well-phrased criticism, and kind of putting it to rest. And I very much appreciate that. It sounds like a lot of it was just, we're saying very similar things, it feels like, which is where theoretically could it happen? Yeah. Is it going to happen? Almost certainly not. But that doesn't mean it isn't a possibility. And it doesn't mean that, if I went through enough kind of thought processes, if there was enough kind of, deconstruction of my atheism or whatever, that it couldn't theoretically happen. Now, obviously, that, again, is unlikely. But no, I appreciate both of you. I appreciate being able to look into a whole new psychology thing. That's super fun. Because I don't always find new stuff on my own with the content silos the way they are sometimes. I know a whole lot about the ones I've looked up, but the ones I haven't looked up, it doesn't want to show them to me for some reason, because that's how algorithms work. But I do really appreciate it, though.
Yeah. Thanks
we
for
very much
giving
appreciate your call.
Yeah, it makes me wish that we had the opportunity to have more conversations about past conversations and to clarify and deep dive a little bit more into and further explain. So thank you.